Now, we begin today this series on David, rooted in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 14, where it says, King David was a man after God's own heart. The reason that God chose David was because he was a man after God's own heart. And what I want to emphasize today is the power of having a heart for God, and to challenge all of you to have that same heart for God. And I want to introduce the message by taking you from Genesis chapter 1 to 1 Samuel chapter 16. We just got through with a Genesis chapters 1 through 3 series, so let me pick up there and let's move forward. Are you ready? Yes. Are you really ready? Yes. Then fasten your seat belts. Here we go. Genesis 1 and 2 is creation. God created the world perfectly in original intent. Genesis 3 is the fall. Sin has permeated every part of God's perfect creation. The evidences of it biblically are in the next chapters. Genesis 4 is the Cain and Abel story. Cain kills his brother Abel. How long did Cain hate his brother? As long as he was able. Thank you. Are you awake? Yeah, let's keep moving forward, okay? Genesis 5 through 9 is the flood narrative. Creation never intended floods to be a part of God's original intent, but that came to judge the people who lived. Genesis chapter 11 is the Tower of Babel narrative, a group of people getting together to build a tower to God to express their pride, their self-sufficiency, and God intervened and scattered them, speaking different languages all over the face of the earth, why we have so many different languages today. So God began salvation history, redemption history in Genesis chapter 12. His plan for restoring Genesis 1 and 2 by first calling a nation called Israel, through whom he would bring his Messiah, Jesus, into the world to begin the restoration process of Genesis 1 and 2. That man was called Abraham, and through his relationship with Sarah began a lineage of patriarchs that continued throughout the rest of Genesis. There's Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, the four patriarchs. Their stories told for the rest of Genesis. At the end of Genesis, 70 Jews are in Egypt. Joseph is overseeing them by the mighty plan of God. At the end of Genesis 50, between that and Exodus 1 is 400 years. Those 70 Jews became 3 million. They eventually went into captivity in Exodus. God raised up a leader named Moses to free them from that slavery. God did so with mighty signs and wonders, parting the Red Sea, taking them to a mountain called Sinai. There God entered into a covenant with Moses and the children of Israel, fulfilling what he promised to Abraham, saying, I'll give you a nation, a land filled with milk and honey, where you will live, where you will be established, and there I will bring Messiah into the world. That covenant was made. God authored it and said, here are the laws I want you to obey for your expression of belief in this covenant. Those laws are called the 10 Commandments. After they were given to the people, God led them to a place called Kadesh Barnea. In about 2 weeks, he put them in that city. They sent out 12 spies to look at the promised land. 10 of the spies came back with a message of despair, a bad news report. There are huge giants in the land. We can't possibly conquer them. The people bought the lie, and God said, you folks are going to lap around the wilderness for 40 years. I'll not have a generation filled with unbelief and doubt entering into my promised land. So all of those 3 million died off, and a new generation was raised up, people who had faith. God then led them into the promised land as Moses passed on the mantle of leadership to Joshua. That's the book of Joshua, where Joshua conquers the land with the people, and they establish themselves in this nation called Israel. And then at the end of Joshua's reign, he failed to do what Moses had done, and that was pass leadership mantles on to other people. There was no leader at the end of Joshua's reign, and that entered into a time called the book of Judges. In the nation of Israel, they would go through cycles of first abhorring sin, then enduring sin, then finally embracing sin and falling into a moral abyss. Whenever that happened, God would raise up a judge who would restore them to hating sin and then God's recognition and blessing upon that nation. The final judge that was raised up was named Samuel, starting in 1 Samuel chapter 1. But before he was raised up, there is the most telling verse in all of the Bible. At the end of the book of Judges, this verse says, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Sound familiar? That is the essence of sin. Everybody doing what is right in their own eyes, not seeking God's will in anything. So at the end of that time period, as Israel once again swung into a moral abyss, the people were discouraged. They wanted leadership. So they looked at all the nations around them and they said, let's have a king. Samuel said, God alone should be your king. They said, no, we want a king. We want to be like the other nations. So they elected a king. His name was Saul. He was tall, attractive, articulate, bright. There was only one major problem with Saul. His heart was filled with paranoia and demagoguery. He was filled with self-aggrandizement. And eventually, though he started well, he allowed the nation to spiral even more down into a moral abyss. And it was at this point that Samuel looked at the nation, looked at Saul in his terrible demagoguery, and finally he said, Lord, what should I do? His heart was grieving. His heart was sad. God says, I've got another king chosen, a king after my own heart. I want you to go anoint him as that king. That story is told in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 1 through 13. It is today's text. Out of reverence for the reading of the scripture, if you're able, would you please stand? You didn't think I could do that, did you? That is Genesis 1 to 1 Samuel 16. Let's pick up the story right now. This is the word of the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons. And Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. And invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. And you shall anoint for him whom I declare to you. Samuel did what the Lord commanded and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came to meet him trembling and said, do you come peaceably? And he said, peaceably, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. And he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they came, he looked on Eliab and said to him, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. And Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, and Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen these. Then Samuel said to Jesse, are all your sons here? And he said, there remains yet the youngest, but behold, he is keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and get him, for we will not sit down till he comes here. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. And Samuel rose and went up to Ramah. The word of the Lord. You may be seated. Let me see if I can contemporize the story, retelling it to you and making it a little more meaningful for you today. Samuel was the last great judge in the Bible. He was also a prophet and a priest, powerful. At this point in 1 Samuel 16, he's older. He's graying. He probably has a beard down to his belly. He's not for this world much longer. He's grieving over Saul's leadership and what Saul had brought to the nation of Israel. And he's crying out to the Lord, what do I do? This king is horrible. The nation's slandering you, God, and falling into a moral abyss. And God speaks to him at Ramah and says, don't give up hope. I have already chosen. Before you ever cried out to me, I've already chosen another king. Go to Bethlehem, which was probably an insignificant village, an outpost area that was not very important. It was not in Samuel's normal judicial route. But God says, go there anyway and meet Jesse the Bethlehemite. One of his boys is going to be the next king of Israel. So Samuel, in obedience, starts on his trek to Bethlehem. I would imagine there might have been some boys on the outskirts of the area playing hide and seek, throwing stones at one another, laughing, playing, and they see old Samuel trekking toward the village. They run in and tell the elders of the village and their parents, Samuel's coming, and aghast fills their hearts. The great judge of Israel is coming to our city. Uh-oh, what'd we do wrong? Are we bringing the wrath of God upon Bethlehem? So they rush out to meet Samuel as he comes into the city. They ask the question, are you coming peaceably? Or are you bringing the wrath of God upon our village? And Samuel goes, no. I'm coming to have a party. Let's have a party together. Let's party hardy. In fact, I want you to take a heifer in a society that normally didn't eat much meat. Take the heifer and kill it and put it on the barbecue spit and start turning it. And consecrate yourself, because this is going to be like a worship/church picnic afterwards, with barbecue as our main meal. And I want you to go home first, because in the worship service, you need to be consecrated. Wash your bodies so you can be clean before the Lord. And if you don't mind, maybe wash your clothes too. That might help a bit. Make yourselves ready. But what was going on in Samuel's mind is, this will give me enough time to do what I really wanted to do. If they go home and wash their clothes and wash themselves and then have to allow the hours necessary for the pit barbecue to turn and be ready to be consumed, I'll have enough time to go to Jesse and find out which one of his boys is the king. So in the between time, as the people go to consecrate themselves, Samuel says, who's Jesse the Bethlehemite? And he steps forward and said, that's me. He said, I need to talk to you about one of your boys. Now, can't you imagine what was going on in Jesse's mind at this point? The great prophet, priest, and judge of all of Israel, getting older, probably needs a successor, an apprentice he can teach. He's going to choose one of my boys to be that apprentice, and that means my boy one day is going to be one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful person in all of Israel. That means, woo, ka-ching, ka-ching. I'm going to make some money out of this deal. One of my boys is going to finally free us from this flea-bitten small-town city and my own poverty within this city. Oh, I've got a bunch of sheep in the sheepfold looked after by my youngest boy. Woo! Party hardy is right. This is going to be something that sets me free. So Samuel says, Jesse, would you mind bringing each one of your boys before me? I need to meet each one. So the first one comes. His name is Eliab, and he impresses Samuel immediately. He is tall, handsome, sculpted. He was also a military officer in Saul's army that we'll see in the next chapters. I mean, gals, is there anything more attractive than an athletic, sculpted, good-looking, tall guy in a military uniform? And Samuel looked at him and said, this must be the guy. This is the one the Lord has chosen. He's got it all together. And God whispered in his ear and said, no. No, Samuel. We don't want Saul the sequel. We don't want Saul part 2. Because the sequel is hardly ever better than the original movie. Except The Dark Knight Rises, which is another case for another time, okay? All right? No, don't look on his outward appearance. We made that mistake with Saul, because I don't look on outward appearances as my sign of calling and using someone. I always look at the heart. Okay, Jesse, he's not the one. Eliab, you're out of here. Well, then steps before him Abinadab. And the Lord immediately says, nope, not the one. Then Shammah steps into Samuel's presence, and the Lord says, nope, not the one. And then there parades before Samuel all of the 7 boys, and the Lord consistently says with each one, nope, 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 nope. And he may have said nada just to make his point, okay? Not the one. So Samuel finally says, isn't there another one? Do you not have another boy? Because he's thinking, I know God told me one of your sons is the next king, and none of these are it. Jesse hems and haws and sighs and says, well, there is the youngest. The youngest. That word in the Hebrew is Hakadon. Can you say it with me? Hakadon. One more time. Hakadon, the youngest. It has several different translations. One can mean baby bro. baby brother. How many of you are the youngest in your families? I am the youngest in my family. My brother Howard's 5 years older than I am. My sister Carolyn is 3 years older than I am. Let me tell you the truth growing up. They never took me seriously. Never. They'd have a discussion among themselves. Maybe mom and dad would be a part of the discussion. And if I tried to interject anything, they would skirt me to the edges of the conversation and go, that's just baby bro. That's just the youngest. That's Hakadan. Don't take him seriously. It can also be translated insignificant. He's the youngest. He's Hakadan. He's just not important. Or not worthy is another translation. He's not worthy even to be heard. He's just the youngest. He's the family runt. His father even forgot him to invite him to come to the picnic. The great prophet, priest, and judge of Israel comes to have a great county fair worship service / picnic, and the dad forgets to invite the runt, the youngest. So finally, Jesse says, yeah, I've got one more. He's out in the sheepfold. He's the runt. And Samuel says, I'm not letting anybody sit down until he gets here. Remain standing and go get him. You can't sit down until he gets here. And folks, that'd be like me saying, stand up and you got to stay standing until you give the offering. And give what I want, or you got to stay standing. There's nothing that can cause more uncomfortability, is there, than having to stand up for a long period of time. That's what Samuel did brilliantly. You're not sitting down till he comes here. So they immediately rushed out into the sheep pastures, and they said, David, come on home. So David comes home, and he's described as ruddy, which means red. Red complexion, maybe red hair. Handsome with beautiful eyes. And he walks into the room. Samuel looks at him. David's probably caked with sheep manure, dirt and mud. And God whispers to Samuel, he's the one. He's the one. Take your horn of oil and go anoint him. And Samuel takes his oil, and a symbol of anointing a king over Israel, he pours it down his head to his feet, and there along with the manure and the mud is the oil of God, symbolizing David's now king. The Spirit of God comes upon him in a special, fresh way, not in New Testament terminology, for when the Spirit of God comes upon us, when we receive Jesus, he lives permanently in our hearts, never to leave us. In the Old Testament, the Spirit would come upon a person to accomplish a particular task for God. So God sent His Spirit upon David to accomplish the task of leadership, of being the king over all of Israel. Samuel anoints him, probably blesses him, and then goes back to Ramah. Now, why was David so marginalized? Why was this kid on the extremes, the outskirts of this family life? Here are a few thoughts. First of all, maybe the family itself was marginalized. Here's a marginalized town called Bethlehem, and David's family, Jesse and his mom, were the most marginalized of the marginalized town. Why could that have been? Some of you know your story of the book of Ruth in the Bible. Ruth happened during the time of the Judges, maybe even during the time of Samuel. Naomi left Israel being married to a man. They went to Moab, a place that the Israelites hated. A famine broke out in that land. The son died. Naomi brought Ruth, the wife, back with her to Israel. And after some period of time, she introduced her to an older man named Boaz. They fell in love, and they had some kids. And guess who Ruth's great-great-grandson was? David. So Jesse's family had Gentile Moabitess blood pulsating through their veins. Could it be that in the city, there were comments like, don't have nothing to do with Jesse's family. They got Gentile blood in them. Don't have anything to do with that person. He or she's a mulatto. They got black blood in them. Ostracized. And it could be David was the marginalized within a marginalized family altogether. It could be the anger that the parents felt toward being marginalized was put upon their son. How? Well, secondly, maybe David was unplanned. He was the last child, the youngest, the Hakadan. It could be that, like some of you know, when you've got 3 or 4 or 5 kids and you're barely making ends meet, to have the doctor say to you, another one's on the way, doesn't cause joy, but panic. It could be David was the unplanned runt, and they made him pay for it all of his days. Or maybe it's because he was ruddy, red hair, red complexion, that he was marginalized. How could that be? Let me ask you a question. Have you met many red-headed Jewish boys recently? It's not naturally in their genetic makeup. Could it be that there were whispers in the community, slanderous gossip oozing from the lips of people in the community who suggested things like, maybe Jesse's not the dad? And Jesse was so angry at these slanderous gossips that he marginalized the Hakadan. Or maybe it's as simple as David was an introvert, and introverts tend to be marginalized. But introverts rule the world. They really do. There's a recent book out called Quiet. And in this book, this expert suggests there are 2 kinds of people in the world, introverts and extroverts, and you'll know you're one in how you respond to a large gathering of people. If you're in that large gathering for several hours and after the evening's over, you're energized, you're probably an extrovert. If after the evening, though, you're depressed and depleted energy-wise, you're probably an introvert. And this person in the book, Quiet, offers the suggestion that introverts, if you really look at history, rule the world. It could be David was an introvert, but introverts tend to be criticized. How might he have been an introvert? Because he loved keeping the sheep. He loved his solitude. He loved being away from people. That energized him. Moreover, when he was alone, think of what he did. First of all, by looking at the Psalms, you see 1 Samuel tells us about the life of David. The Psalms tell us about the heart of David. And in the Psalms, you read that David was a poet. And could it be that his brothers, these testosterone-filled brothers who thought military might was how you expressed your masculinity, looked at their little bro and said, how could it be that a real man would write poetry? And moreover, he played a harp. I mean, are you kidding me? What kind of a man sits on a rock and plays a harp? This is one weird dude, the boys said. He needs to be marginalized. Moreover, not only did he write poetry and play a harp, he put the poetry and the harp to psalms and songs of praise to God. Is this one weird dude or not? So he was marginalized. Or maybe it could be finally. In 2 different places in the Psalms, David talks about his mom as a handmaiden of the Lord. Could it be the mama just really loved David more than the other boys? That he had a heart of sensitivity and kindness that just drew her heart to him? And could it be that the other brothers really resented mom loving him more than them? We don't know why. All we do know is David was Hakadan. He was marginalized. He was considered unimportant in his family dynamics. Yet, God chose the Hakadan to be king over Israel. Before Samuel ever went from Ramah to Bethlehem, God had chosen David, the youngest, the runt, the Hakadan, to be the next king over Israel. Why? Verse 7 tells us, God does not look at the outward appearance. God looks at the heart. God loved his heart. He had a heart for God. And you need to know, as the story will unfold in the next weeks, David was an adulterer, he was a murderer, and he was a really bad dad. None of his kids really turned out in a godly way. And yet, God continued to use him. Why? Because he had a heart for God. Your heart. The heart is the seat of who you really are. The heart is the place where you make decisions based on truth. Who you really are long after this body fades away and dies is who you are inside. It's your heart. Think about all the ways we use heart today to describe who we are. We learn by heart. That's our memory. If we have a whole heart, we have great effort. If we have a heart of steel, we're courageous. If we have a closed heart, we're prideful. If we have a hard heart, we're merciless. If we have a tender heart, we're kind. If we are called to have a heart, people are asking us for mercy. Put your heart at rest is a way to say, don't worry, have peace. Fix your heart on something means focus. Wearing your heart on a sleeve means you have openness to others. Do it with all of your heart, we ask, and that's commitment. A wounded heart means you've been rejected. Search your heart means look for truth. And to leave your heart in San Francisco is a song that was produced 30 or 40 years ago. But it talked about who you are and what's most important to you. Your heart is who you are, not outward appearances. David's son Solomon got this when he wrote in Proverbs 4:23. Would you read this verse with me? Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. From your heart flows the springs of life. The heart of the matter is a matter of the heart. You are who your heart is, folks. Now, the key to David's heart for God is wrapped up in this one word, humility. Humility. What is the essence of humility? Humility is the belief and knowledge that everything I have is a gift from God. I spend my days in thanksgiving and gratitude before God. I have the attitude of gratitude. I know that every next breath I take into my lungs over the next 5 seconds is a gift from God. I know every morsel of food I ingest is a gift from God. I know that the clothes on my back and that spouse next to me is a gift from God. I know that the job I have, the money I've earned in my bank account's a gift from God. And you say to me, but look how hard I worked to earn all of that. And I ask you, where did you get the power to work that hard? Who gave you the intellect to be able to do what you do? Everything in life is a gift from God, and we spend our time in worship, praise, and thanksgiving for the one who gave us these gifts. I can't help but wonder in the wilderness if David pondered why God called Israel. I had a professor in seminary who used to say, how odd of God to choose the Jews. And he was asking the question, why did God choose the Jews? To be his special chosen people, but also through whom he would bring Messiah, Jesus, into this world. And I can't wonder if David didn't think about Deuteronomy 7 and 8. God said, it was not because you were more in number than any other people than the Lord set his love on you and chose you, for you were the fewest of all people. But it is because the Lord loves you and is keeping the oath that he swore to your fathers, that the Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Why did God choose the Jews? Because God wanted to. It was nothing meritorious that they had done to earn this choice. God just chose them. Why did God choose David to be king over Israel? He was a poor shepherd boy, a Hakadan, marginalized. Why did God do it? Because God just did it. Nothing within David, God just did it. Why did God choose you and me who love Christ? I don't have a clue. I look at some of your lives and I go, Lord, why did you choose them? I don't know. And many of you look at me and go, I don't get it, God. Why'd you choose him? And the answer is, we don't know, just God did it because of his grace, because of his love. Therefore, we have no boasting in our hearts about anything, much less our salvation, our relationship with God. It's all because of his grace. And I think David understood that. Moreover, in Psalm 78, 70 through 72, here are these words. He, God, chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds. From following the nursing ewes, he brought him to shepherd Jacob, his people, Israel, his inheritance, with upright, what, folks? Come on, read it with me. With upright heart, he shepherded them and guided them with his skillful hand. Upright heart. You know what else how else that word can be translated? Integrity. With integrity, David shepherded his people. Integrity. It means your life is integrated. It means you're the same outside as you are inside. It means you're the same publicly as you are privately. Your life is holistically integrated. The best definition of integrity I've ever heard is who you are when no one's looking. If you are humble, you are the same inside and out, publicly and privately. You are the same when no one is looking. David was a teenager when God called him. You teenagers, don't you ever tell me for a second you can't be used mightily for God. All he needs is a humble heart that's willing to say, to God be the glory, no matter where he's planted you. You can be in public school, private school, or home school. God can use you mightily. Don't use these words, oh, I'm just a teenager. How can God use me? David was a teenage shepherd boy. Give God the glory for that. When he called him and used him for his purposes. And notice that God formed his heart in integrity and humility in solitude. Folks, your idols will come to the surface when you're alone. If you go be alone for 3 hours in solitude, where your mind starts going, where your thoughts start focusing, those are your idols. David disciplined his thoughts. He formed habits in his heart when he was alone as a shepherd boy among the sheep. David met God in nature, and many of the Psalms reflect it. Psalm 8, for example, where he cries out, "O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all of the earth. When I look at the sun, the moon, and the stars, and I contemplate, why would you even think about me? I have no answer." David met God alone in nature. He would rescue even one sheep that walked away from the sheepfold against a lion or a bear, against these furious predators that David would normally not have a chance. He would leave the 99, go after the one, and with his slingshot, save the one sheep, this one vulnerable sheep, from the lion and the bear, sometimes even killing them because of his courage. Now, why did he do that? Because he was playing to an audience of one. He had only one he wanted to please, and that was the Lord God who created him. He wasn't playing for the applause of sheep. Have you ever heard a sheep applause? Impossible. He did it to get God's pleasure and God's pleasure alone. There was no worldly ego food for David. Only his thoughts, and he disciplined his thoughts to be God's thoughts. In Psalm 139, David says, "Lord, examine my thoughts and make them yours." Would any of us be so courageous to pray that prayer to God? Examine my thoughts that come into my head and make sure they're your thoughts. Nature was David's nursery. God's pasture propelled him to the palace. Saul looked the part. David had the heart. Saul was about outward appearances. David was about an inward reality. And I would suggest that all of us, myself included, would find all of our idols rooted somewhere, somehow, in outward appearances. Be honest. Be vulnerable. Search the idols of your heart, what you focus on, where you spend your time and your money. I would bet you that every single one of them has to do with outward appearances and not the heart. We live keeping appearances. The result of David's heart for God, 600 times in the Old Testament, David's name is mentioned. 60 times in the New Testament, David's name is mentioned. The most often mentioned name in all of the Bible isn't Jesus, it's David, the beloved, the shepherd boy. Why? Because he had a heart for God. And the ultimate compliment to David is found in Romans chapter 1, verse 3, when Paul writes these words about Jesus, concerning his son, who was descended from David according to the flesh. The greatest compliment possible was for God to say of David, through you and your flesh was birthed the God-man Jesus. So what about you? Where's your heart today? May I give you a humility test? May I? 3 people want it, okay? May I give you a humility test? Okay. Do you know everything in your life comes from God? Do you believe that every gift you have comes from God? Next question. How much time do you spend in your life working on outward appearances versus the inward heart? So many of us spend countless hours feeding our body, sometimes well, sometimes not. Exercising our bodies so that they'll be stronger, maybe have a few more years. Some even doing Botox, plastic surgery, to make us look a little bit better for a little longer period of time. May I give you a great biblical insight. It doesn't matter how well you eat, how long you exercise, or how much plastic surgery you have. At some point, you're done. In the name of Jesus, have a nice day, okay? You're done. And that's not to say we shouldn't take care of our bodies. It's not to say we shouldn't try to make ourselves look good. I'm not saying that. This is the only body you get. I get that. It's just not going to last forever. Your heart is going to last forever. Do you spend as much time developing the inward habits of the heart in personal Bible study, prayer, and worship as you do with your outward body that won't last? David was a man after God's own heart. He committed adultery, murder, and he was a bad dad, yet God continued to forgive him and use him because he had a heart for God. He developed a habit of the heart. Do you?